You ever walk into a room and immediately know something's off, but no one says a word? That chill, that gut instinct. That's the universe whispering, not shouting. That's silence doing the talking. And the people who survive, who win, who rise, they're the ones who listen to what others are too loud to hear. We live in a world where noise is currency. Everyone's got something to say, something to prove, something to post. But let me tell you something dangerous, something powerful. The real strength, it's in the quiet, not passive, not weak, intentional. When you learn to be silent, everything around you reveals itself. The truth, people's intentions, the next move, but most importantly, you reveal yourself to yourself. You want power, control, influence. Stop broadcasting, start observing. That silence they think means you don't know. It means you're calculating. That quiet smile you give when others explode. That's composure forged in the fire of discipline. People underestimate the quiet ones. And that is your greatest weapon. Because while they're too busy performing, you're absorbing. While they're defending themselves, you're decoding them. Silence sharpens your senses. And when you're truly silent, you become undeniable. It takes everything in today's world not to react, not to fire back, not to post the last word. But that's exactly why it's powerful. The people who react emotionally, impulsively, destructively, they lose control. And the ones who remain silent, they maintain it. Because silence isn't submission. It's strategy. You know what they never teach you growing up? That silence is one of the most powerful strategies you'll ever own. They tell you to speak up, to assert yourself, to make noise if you want to be noticed. But here's the hard truth. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one saying nothing. Because silence, when used with intention, is not weakness. It's not retreat. It's a calculated decision. It's control disguised as calm. I learned this the hard way. In rooms where pressure broke people, in high-stakes situations where one wrong word could cost someone everything. And the ones who cracked, they talked too much. They revealed too much. But the one who knew how to hold that silence, who didn't rush to defend themselves, who didn't feel the need to explain every move, that was the person who had control, not just over the room, but over themselves, over their emotions, over the power dynamics. See, you don't need to announce your intelligence, your plans, or your strength. When you're truly confident, you don't rush to prove it. You don't panic to fill the air, you watch. You process. And then, if necessary, you speak. But only with purpose. That's how professionals operate. That's how leaders carry themselves. That's how strong people command a room without ever raising their voice. The world wants you to believe that being loud is being powerful. But loud is often just fear in disguise. It's noise trying to cover insecurity. Real power doesn't perform, it prepares. And silence is that preparation. It's the space where you gather yourself, control the tempo, and move with precision when the moment finally comes. That's not passive. That's mastery. Most people are addicted to reacting. The moment they feel triggered, challenged, or ignored, they respond. Fast, loud, emotional. It's a reflex, not a decision. And that's exactly where they lose their power. Because every time you react without thinking, you hand over control to the person who provoked you. You let them dictate your energy, your focus, your behavior. And that's dangerous. That's what gets people manipulated, misunderstood, and mild. But when you choose silence instead of reaction, now you're operating from intelligence, not impulse. The ones who succeed, the ones who stay ahead, they observe first. They don't just listen to what's being said. They listen to why it's being said, how it's being said, and what's not being said. And you can't do that when you're busy trying to fire back. You can't read the room when you're trying to dominate it. Silence gives you that edge. It slows the moment down. It creates space between stimulus and response. And in that space you gain clarity, you gather data. You assess who's real and who's just loud. I've seen it in boardrooms, interrogations, relationships, everywhere. The person who watches, who observes without reacting, becomes the most unpredictable one in the room. And unpredictability. That's power. That's presence. Because people know how to manage someone who doesn't play the emotional game. They're not prepared for someone who listens more than they speak. So next time someone tries to provoke you, insult you, challenge your values, don't give them what they want. Don't react. Just pause, breathe, observe, Let them show you who they are before you decide how to move. That's how you control the room. Not by raising your voice, but by raising your awareness. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you command. And the loudest person in the room, usually, they're trying to earn respect by force. They talk over others. They explain themselves endlessly. They make sure everyone knows what they've done. But here's the truth. When you truly own who you are, you don't need to be loud. You don't need to beg people to see you. You just exist in your strength, and that presence does all the speaking for you. People respect what they can't easily read. They respect the ones who don't react to every comment, who don't jump into every conversation, who don't try to prove their worth in every moment. Why? Because it signals control. It shows discipline. And discipline is rare. In a world where everyone's looking for attention, the person who doesn't chase it becomes magnetic. Your silence becomes your posture. Your stillness becomes your statement. You don't have to explain your silence. You don't have to justify it. Let people wonder. Let them fill in the blanks. That mystery, that quiet strength, that's what earns you respect without asking for it. People might not understand you right away. They might misjudge you. Let them. Because eventually, they'll come to see what silence has been protecting all along. Your power, your principles, your peace. Respect grows when people realize you're not performing for them, that you're not trying to please, impress, or convince. You've already made peace with who you are. You've already chosen self-respect over validation, and that right there, that quiet confidence, will speak louder than any words ever could. You ever notice how nature moves? It doesn't scream. It doesn't announce its presence. It just is. A storm doesn't send a warning before it tears through. A lion doesn't roar before it attacks. It stalks, it studies, and when the moment is right, it strikes. That's real power. Silent, calculated. Precise, and if you're smart, you'll learn to move the same way, because power that performs is insecure. But power that's quiet, that's real. The world conditions us to think we have to be loud to be taken seriously, that if we're not constantly speaking, posting, showing, we'll be forgotten. But when you study people who truly dominate their space, you'll notice something. They don't fight to be seen. Their presence demands it. Not because they speak the most, but because when they do, it means something. Because they've already watched, listened, and understood before they ever opened their mouth. Real power doesn't need to convince anyone. It doesn't need to validate itself. It operates with certainty, and that certainty is silent. You don't see it coming. You don't hear it coming. But when it lands, you feel it. That's how you should be. Quiet before the move, calm before the shift. Because when you stop announcing every step, people can't predict you. And if they can't predict you, they can't control you. Let others waste their energy trying to be heard. You stay rooted. You move in silence. And when you do act, make it count, because when your actions are quiet, but your results are undeniable, that's when the world learns your name without you ever having to shout it. People confuse stillness with inaction. They think if you're not moving, you're falling behind. But here's the truth. Stillness is strength. It's the ability to stay grounded when everything around you is trying to pull you into chaos. It's the discipline to hold your position when the world demands a reaction. And most people can't do it. They crack. They panic. They respond to every trigger, every opinion, every attack. But when you learn to sit in that silence, to breathe through the storm, to hold your ground, that's where your real power builds. You don't need to flinch just because the pressure rises. You don't need to raise your voice just because someone challenges you. That's stillness you practice. That's your edge. It makes you unshakable. And when you're unshakable, you're dangerous. Because you don't play by everyone else's emotional rules. You control your pace. You choose your battles. You don't move until you decide it's time. Stillness gives you clarity. It gives you command. And more than that, it shows people you're not easily rattled. You're not desperate for attention. You're not controlled by noise. You are centered, calm, focused. And that unsettles people, because they don't know what to expect from someone who refuses to be dragged into the drama. Someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. So while others run in circles trying to be heard, trying to be first, trying to be loud, be still, let them exhaust themselves. Let them show their cards, and you sit back, steady, knowing that your strength isn't in how fast or loud you move, but in how deeply you've learned to hold your silence. You've only got so much energy in a day. Mental energy, emotional energy, spiritual energy. And every time you react to something that doesn't deserve your attention, you give a piece of that energy away. Every argument you engage in, every person you try to prove wrong, every post you let get under your skin, you're spending energy you'll never get back. And for what? To feel momentarily heard, to win a battle that means nothing in the long game. That's not strength. That's waste. Silence is protection. It's how you conserve your power instead of bleeding it out for things and people that don't matter. Because here's the truth, not everything requires a response. Not every insult deserves your voice. Not every disagreement is your war to fight. The moment you realize that, you stop running around trying to defend your value to people who were never going to respect it anyway. When you choose silence, you're not walking away. You're standing taller. You're saying, my peace is worth more than this. You're saying, you don't get access to my energy. And that boundary, that's how you stay in control. That's how you avoid burnout. That's how you stay focused on what actually matters. Your goals, your growth, your purpose. There's a reason the most powerful people in the room often say the least. They're not wasting their strength. They're preserving it. They know what their time is worth. And they know their silence doesn't mean they're not aware. It means they've decided not to invest in nonsense. That kind of restraint is rare. That kind of control is how you become unbreakable. People don't know what to do with someone who doesn't talk too much. It unsettles them, because most of the time, they're used to reading people by their words. What they say, how quickly they say it, how emotional they get. But when you're the one who stays quiet, who holds back, who doesn't show all your cards, you become unreadable. And that mystery, that unpredictability, it makes people nervous. But it also makes them respectful. Because they can't figure you out, and what people can't figure out, they can't control. You walk into a room and you don't over-explain. You don't try to be liked. You don't try to fill every silence with small talk. And suddenly, people start watching you differently. They notice your posture, your eyes, the way you carry yourself. Because when you stop using words to prove who you are, the weight of your presence speaks for you. That kind of silence builds tension, and tension builds power. Quiet confidence makes people lean in, not back off. And when they lean in, they start wondering, who is this person? What are they thinking? What do they know that I don't? That's your advantage, because mystery creates space. And in that space, you control the narrative. They'll project strength onto you. They'll assume you have more than you do. And if you're smart, you'll let them. You don't need to correct their assumptions. Let them think you're more powerful than you are. Let them overestimate you. That gives you room to move, to strategize, to strike when they least expect it. Silence keeps you dangerous, not in a hostile way, but in a composed, unshakable, impossible to predict kind of way. And in a world obsessed with transparency, being unreadable makes you rare. And rare is always powerful. You can't hear yourself when the world is screaming at you. You can't feel your own instincts when you're drowning in opinions, distractions, expectations. That's what silence does. It cuts through the noise. It brings you back home. It strips away everything that doesn't belong to you so you can finally see what does. That's why the most intelligent, powerful, and self-assured people spend time in silence. Because clarity doesn't come from doing more. It comes from listening more deeply. To yourself. People think they need to talk to solve problems, to get answers, to feel better. But the truth is, some answers don't come from conversations. They come from stillness, from being alone with your thoughts, from confronting what you've been avoiding. And that's where silence becomes more than just a lack of sound. It becomes a weapon, a mirror, a map. When you're constantly talking, you're not just filling the room. You're filling yourself with everyone else's ideas, emotions, beliefs. That noise clouds your judgment. It makes you second-guess your gut. You start reacting to what other people want you to be instead of choosing who you actually are. But when you step back, when you remove yourself from the chaos, that's when your inner voice starts to rise. And it's not loud, it doesn't yell. It whispers. It waits for you to pay attention. And most people never do. Because they're too busy trying to be heard by the world, when the only voice they need to hear is already inside of them. Silence lets you process what's real, what's fake, what's important, what's urgent. Most people are chasing goals that were never theirs to begin with. Because they never took a moment of silence to ask, what do I actually want? They're living on autopilot, running after approval, chasing status, mimicking what looks successful on the outside. But success isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the most aligned with yourself. And alignment only happens in quiet. In silence, you realize how many things don't deserve your attention, how many arguments aren't worth the energy, how many people are only there for the noise, not for your growth. And that kind of realization, it stings. But it also frees you, because once you know, you can let go. You stop trying to fix everything. You stop trying to please everyone. You start protecting your peace like your life depends on it. Because it does. I've sat across from people who had everything to lose. People who were staring down the consequences of their worst decisions. And you know what they all had in common? They all said, I didn't listen to myself. They ignored the warning signs. They drowned out their own wisdom with the voices of others. And by the time they realized it, it was too late. That's the price of living too loud. That's the danger of moving too fast without checking in with yourself. But you don't need a breakdown to get clarity. You don't need to lose everything to find yourself. You just need to slow down, get quiet, ask better questions. Questions like, am I proud of the way I'm living? Do I trust the people I've surrounded myself with? Am I building something real, or am I just performing? And don't rush the answers. Let them come in silence. Let them come over time, because rushed answers are usually the wrong ones. But the truth, the real truth, always survives the silence. You want to know if someone's truly confident. Watch what they do when no one's watching. Watch how comfortable they are in silence. Watch how they move when they're not performing, because real confidence doesn't need applause. It doesn't need validation, it just is. And when you find that kind of inner peace, you stop chasing. You stop proving. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't even listening. And here's the irony: the moment you stop trying to be understood, people start understanding you. Because they finally see who you are without the noise. They feel the weight of your presence. They recognize the strength in your calm, and that energy, that clarity. It draws the right people in, and pushes the wrong people out. You don't need to scream your values to live by them. You don't need to defend your boundaries to enforce them. You don't need to tell people who you are. You just need to be who you are, consistently, quietly, unapologetically, and that begins with knowing yourself in silence. We spend so much of our lives learning how to speak, how to argue, how to debate. But the most powerful thing you'll ever learn is how to listen, not just to others, but to that voice inside that's been buried under years of noise, pressure, and performance. That voice isn't broken. It's just been silenced. And now it's your job to make space for it again, because when you finally hear yourself, when you really listen, you stop asking for permission. You stop waiting for approval. You start showing up in rooms not to be accepted, but to lead, not with noise, but with purpose, with focus, with clarity. And that kind of energy, it can't be faked. It can't be taught in a classroom or shouted from a stage. It comes from doing the uncomfortable work in silence, day after day, until your mind, your heart, and your mission are in perfect alignment. So let the world be loud. Let it shout and spin and scramble for attention. You don't need to match that chaos. You don't need to keep up. You need to stay still long enough to remember who you are, to trust your instincts again, to hear your truth above the noise. Because when you know yourself in silence, no one can shake you in the storm. Patience is power, and most people don't have it. They rush, they force, they panic when things don't happen on their timeline. But when you're truly grounded, when you've mastered your emotions, you realize that not every battle needs to be fought today. Not every answer needs to be immediate. Not every move needs to be announced. There's power in the pause. There's strength in the stillness. Because the person who can wait, who can outlast the noise, the pressure, the chaos, is the one who ends up with the upper hand. When you're patient, you don't just sit back. You prepare, you train, you study. You become more aware of the landscape. You notice things others miss because they're too busy reacting, too busy chasing. Patience gives you vision. It gives you space to observe before you act. And in that space, you gain leverage. You don't waste your energy rushing into things that don't serve you. You wait until the moment is right, and when it is, you move. Not with noise, not with hesitation, but with precision. People will try to make you feel like you're falling behind if you don't speak up fast enough, act fast enough, respond fast enough. Let them. Because moving fast doesn't mean you're moving smart. And silence doesn't mean you're doing nothing. It means you're choosing your moment. It means you're protecting your energy. It means you're watching everything. And waiting for when it actually counts. The most powerful decisions I've ever made didn't come from panic. They came from waiting. Watching, learning. They came from being quiet long enough to see what others missed. They came from resisting the urge to prove myself and instead letting my results speak when it mattered most. Patience isn't weakness. It's discipline. It's choosing to delay gratification so you can gain something far more valuable. Control. Control over your emotions. Control over your reactions. Control over your path. And that control, it intimidates people because they can't shake you. They can't rush you. They can't manipulate you into making decisions you'll regret later. So while the world pushes you to rush, choose to wait. Choose to watch. Choose to move on your time. Because when you combine patience with silence, you don't just react to life. You command it. You stop being a product of your environment and start becoming the architect of your future. And that's what separates the average from the extraordinary. There are moments in life when your silence will say more than 1,000 perfectly chosen words ever could. You don't always need to defend, explain, or argue. Sometimes the strongest message you can deliver is none at all, because silence isn't emptiness, it's presence. And when it's intentional, it becomes the loudest, most unforgettable thing in the room. You want to let someone know they've crossed a line. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to match their energy. You just don't respond. You withhold your reaction, your energy, your access. That silence becomes the consequence. It becomes the boundary. And believe me, people feel it. They feel it harder than any comeback you could have delivered in the heat of the moment. We live in a culture that values noise, that celebrates the last word, the bold statement, the public reaction. But silence, that takes discipline. It takes control to sit with what you're feeling and not hand it over to someone else to validate, exploit, or twist. It takes self-trust to know that you don't need to speak in order to stand your ground. Because when you stop trying to win the argument and start protecting your energy, you're playing a much bigger game. You're choosing to be effective, not emotional. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you're operating at a level where words are no longer your only tool. Your energy becomes your statement. Your restraint becomes your power. And your ability to not respond becomes the proof that you're not controlled by anyone but yourself. When you withhold your words, people are left with their own. They replay them, they sit with them, and in that silence they start to realize the weight of what was said, what was done, and that awareness, that discomfort, that's growth, not for you, but for them. You already did your work by choosing not to engage. So the next time you're tempted to speak just to be understood, ask yourself, is my silence louder? Will my stillness leave a bigger mark? Because there's a kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself. It just stands there, unbothered, unshaken, undeniable. And when you own that kind of silence, you don't just walk through the world, you change it. One quiet, powerful moment at a time. So let the world keep chasing noise. Let them rush to speak, to react, to be seen. You don't need to join the chaos. You don't need to shout to be powerful. Because when you've mastered the art of silence, you've mastered the art of control. The control of your energy, your focus, your purpose. That kind of silence doesn't shrink you. It defines you. It keeps you steady when others fall apart. It sharpens your instincts, protects your peace, and magnifies your impact. And the moment you stop using your voice to prove your worth is the moment the world starts to feel your presence without you saying a single word. Be silent, not because you have nothing to say, but because you know the right moment will come. And when it does, you won't need noise, You'll just need you. Fully present, unshakably grounded, absolutely unstoppable.